I still remember my very first combat mission like it was yesterday. That day, the enemy came in hard and went straight after the bombers, hitting them with everything they had. I can still hear Major Campbell's voice saying he had a bad feeling about it, that we were probably heading into a dogfight because those fighters weren't backing off at all. Back in the 1930s, life in the United States was split wide open by segregation and racial inequality. The Great Depression only poured fuel on that fire. Jobs were scarce, and black families were usually the first ones pushed out of work, which only deepened the divide in society. Even so, I was a young kid in Minnesota who refused to lower his dreams, no matter how bad things looked around me. I was just a snot-nosed kid growing up in Minneapolis, nothing special on the surface. My mother had her heart set on me becoming a pianist, and she held on to that dream until about the 6th grade. Then one morning I woke up with a completely different idea in my head. I decided I was going to be a fighter pilot in the military. I couldn't explain why or how it happened. It just hit me, plain and simple. I remember walking up to my mother and telling her I didn't want to practice piano anymore because I was going to fly airplanes. She stared at me like I'd completely lost my mind. You have to understand, in those days black men were not being trained as pilots at all. Segregation back then wasn't just written into law. It was woven into everyday life and tradition, and people followed it without question. Even going back to the First World War, African Americans had tried to become military pilots and were turned away every single time. Things finally started to shift in the late 1930s, when the world began sliding toward another war. Then, in March of 1941, President Roosevelt made a decision that changed everything. He announced that one squadron would be trained, made up of 35 pilots and 47 airmen. That was the moment the door finally cracked open. We became known as the Tuskegee Airmen, named after the university where we trained, and we were the first African American flying squadron in United States military history. For me, that was my chance. From that point on, I had one goal and one goal only. I wanted to fly, and nothing else mattered. In June of 1942, I was 17 years old and fresh out of high school. I went down, took the exams, passed them, and got the invitation to join. Before long, I was part of the 332nd Fighter Group in the 15th Air Force. We were the ones with the red tails on our planes. They trained a total of 992 pilots. Out of all of us, only 355 actually made it overseas to fight in the war. By the summer of 1944, I was sent to Europe to join the rest of the 332nd, attached to the 15th Air Force. The 15th was desperate for new pilots and replacement aircraft. They had lost hundreds of planes during bombing runs across Europe. At that point, they had already lost 114 bomber crews, 10 men per crew. That's a staggering number of airplanes and an even greater number of lives. The belief was that too many fighter groups were chasing personal victories, breaking formation and leaving the bombers exposed. That opened the door for German fighters to move in and shoot them down. When I finally arrived overseas, we met Colonel Davis. He told us he only wanted one promise from us. He said our job was to stay with the bombers. We were to escort them to the target, protect them the entire way, and bring them home safely so they could fly again. On my first mission overseas, I didn't see a single enemy aircraft. On several missions after that, it was the same story, nothing at all. Other times, though, the sky was full of them. By my 12th mission, we were escorting bombers deep into Germany, and we knew the enemy was waiting. That time, there were maybe 8 or 12 fighters up there. They came in fast and slammed into the bombers hard. I remember Major Campbell saying he could tell this was going to turn into a serious dogfight because they weren't peeling away. They attacked. We dove straight down on them. When you lock onto an enemy, if your timing is perfect, you might get 1 or 2 seconds, maybe 3, where he's right in your sights. Then just like that, he's gone, pulling away at full speed. It felt like they must have thrown a decoy into the mix that day, because we came down on one of them all at once, fast and hard, just like that. Instead of flying straight out, the guy suddenly rolled his aircraft. That move kept him sitting in my gun sights just a little longer than he should have been. Because of that, he gave me the chance to fire not just one quick burst, but 2, even several bursts. I remember thinking, fine by me, if that's how you want to play it. We were firing at him the whole way down. Bloop, 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 round after round. He finally pulled up just over the treetops and dragged us straight into a flak trap. As we came over it, everything below us opened up and started firing. I remember thinking, this guy is trying to suck us in. Somewhere in that mess, I must have taken hits in my wing tanks or something, because at 25,000 feet I suddenly had fuel streaming out and no engine power at all. The airplane started falling like a rock. We dropped down to about 10,000 feet, and that's when I spotted an old, abandoned fighter strip. I was dead stick, no power, nothing. You try to wrestle the airplane around, but at the same time you've got to slow it down enough to land the thing without killing yourself. Long story short, I forced it onto the ground. I hit a ditch, the plane bounced up, and it snapped in half right behind the cockpit. I jumped out as fast as I could. It was a brutal landing, but the way I always saw it, any landing you can walk away from is a good one. That day, I was lucky enough to walk away from my first real run-in with enemy fighters. A few weeks later, on my 30th mission, luck wasn't going to be on my side anymore. In March of 1945, I was flying with the 99th Fighter Squadron when we were assigned a mission to strafe and destroy German supply trains near the Austrian border. When we reached the target area, we couldn't believe what we were seeing. Train cars were packed in everywhere. Locomotives were scattered all over the place. The last thing any of us expected to run into was enemy fighters. The radio exploded with excitement. Guys were yelling things like, "Look at what we've got, this one's mine, I just blew one up." It was nothing but non-stop chatter. Then someone shouted that we'd missed one. There it was, a huge, beautiful locomotive sitting there untouched. Somebody said, "Let's go get it." So I went in. I lined up on that locomotive, and it was glowing like a Christmas tree from all the fire. Just as I pulled up to clear it, the whole thing exploded. The blast swallowed me up. Right after that, my oil pressure started going crazy. The oil temperature shot through the roof. Then the engine quit completely. I rolled the aircraft over, pulled the nose up, and jettisoned the canopy. That's what throws you clear. Not long after that, I hit the ground. When I came to, there were a couple of men on skis standing nearby. They jumped off, raised a rifle, and pointed it straight at me. I didn't hesitate. I threw my hands up right away. I had come down somewhere in Germany, and now I was in the hands of 2 German constables. They marched me straight into a nearby village, one that had taken damage from our strafing run earlier. As soon as I entered the town, I realized I was in serious trouble. An angry crowd closed in on me fast. Here I was, one of the pilots they blamed. They wanted a piece of me. Truth is, they'd already picked out the tree they planned to use. I knew there was nothing I could do. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. There was nowhere to go. I honestly believed that was it, that I was about to die. Then I felt a hand grab my shoulder. One of the constables stepped in front of me, chambered a round in his rifle, and stood there protecting me, keeping the crowd back. Over the next several weeks, I was moved from one prisoner of war camp to another. There were interrogations, and there was barely enough food to survive. But as the Allies kept pushing deeper into Germany, I knew I just had to hang on a little longer. The Allied forces were coming in from the west, moving steadily east. The Russians were closing in from the other side, and the whole front was slowly collapsing. They kept evacuating us farther inland, but we knew what was happening. We knew General Patton wasn't that far away anymore. There were nights when you could hear the tanks far off in the distance. Even then, you knew exactly what was happening. By the next morning, the sound was closer. We could hear the tanks rumbling just beyond the big barbed wire fence surrounding the camp. Before long, they smashed part of the fence down, and these massive tanks rolled straight through. Patton was right there, riding just behind the second or third tank. I remember him talking, saying we had the enemy on the run. He was already talking about Berlin, about what he was going to do when he got there. That man had the filthiest mouth you ever heard, and he didn't hold back one bit. Every time he talked like that, all 1,000 of us were cheering, yelling, "Yay, Patton." He told us he was heading to Berlin and would be there in a few days. We went wild. Of course, they ended up stopping him, and he was never allowed to go into Berlin. The honor of taking Berlin was left to the Russians instead. Still, American forces, and really all of Europe, let out a huge sigh of relief. The war against Germany was finally over, and before long, I was headed back home to the United States. After the war, the Tuskegee Airmen came back with a reputation we had earned the hard way. We were recognized as one of the most respected fighter groups in the Army Air Forces, known for having some of the best pilots and one of the strongest bomber protection records of the entire war. Because of how fiercely we defended our bombers, people started calling us the Red-Tailed Angels. There were plenty of times when we were escorting bombers back home and heard one of them come over the radio yelling that he had lost another engine. Sometimes they'd be down to 2 engines and completely outside fighter cover, begging for help. The lead aircraft would call out, asking who still had fuel. Then he'd assign a few of us to peel off, find that bomber, and bring him home safely. We did that all the time. Bomber crews started asking, "Who are those guys flying with the red tails?" They'd say those pilots stayed with us the entire way. Somebody finally put a name to it, and that's how the Red-Tailed Angels nickname stuck. In 1948, what we did during the war played a major role in President Truman's decision to fully integrate the United States Armed Forces. For the first time, Americans of every race and background were officially serving side by side. Looking back now, the Red Tails still stand as proof of what perseverance and equality really mean. At the time, though, none of that crossed my mind. I wasn't thinking about history at all. That was the last thing I cared about back then. As I got older, I started to understand the significance of what we had done. And honestly, if we hadn't performed at such a high level, I don't know if President Truman would have ever pushed for integration. But we did perform. And because of that, it happened. When I reflect on it now, it feels like there were obstacles at every turn. One after another, non-stop. But if the Tuskegee Airmen could overcome all of that, then I truly believe anyone can do the same.